The winter of 1885 was a beast that refused to sleep. It had settled over the valley in November and tightened its grip with every passing week, turning the Wyoming landscape into a vast, white silence. Arthur Thorne stood at the window of his study, the glass cold enough to burn his fingertips. Below, in the courtyard of the Double T Ranch, the morning ritual was unfolding. His foreman, Sam, was distributing the year-end bonuses to the ranch hands. Arthur watched as the men accepted their envelopes. They were good men, hardened by the elements, their faces obscured by scarves and low-brimmed hats. Each one touched the brim in gratitude, pocketed the money, and trudged away through the knee-deep drifts. There were no smiles, only the grim relief of survival. The sun was a pale, heatless disk hanging in the sky, casting long, blue shadows across the frozen yard. Frost, intricate and thick as lace, coated every rail of the corral. Arthur turned back to his mahogany desk. The warmth of the study, fed by a roaring hearth, felt almost oppressive compared to the world outside. 3 more envelopes sat on the polished wood. The church donation, the widow's fund, the orphanage contribution. His fountain pen scratched across the heavy paper of the checks. The amounts were substantial, the gesture automatic. These were the obligations of a successful man, checkboxes on a list of Christmas duties. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice came from the doorway. Mrs. Gable, his housekeeper, stood there wringing her apron in her hands. She looked distressed. "I hate to trouble you, sir, especially with Christmas only days away," she said. "What is it, Mrs. Gable?" Arthur capped his pen. "It's the Chen place. I passed by there yesterday evening on my way back from town. The chimney smoke. It was thick and acrid. Green wood, sir. I'd wager my soul she's burning fence posts just to keep from freezing." Arthur frowned. Mylin Chen. She was the widow of a railroad worker who had died in a tunnel collapse 2 years prior. She had stayed in town, taking in laundry and mending, keeping to herself with a quiet, impenetrable dignity. "She never asks for help," Arthur murmured. "Pride," Mrs. Gable said, shaking her head. "Foolish pride, if you ask me. But a woman alone in this weather. That little cabin is little more than kindling." "I'll handle it," Arthur said, rising from his chair. Mrs. Gable nodded and retreated. Arthur opened his desk drawer and removed a fresh envelope. He counted out $50, a small fortune in these times, enough to buy proper season firewood to last through February, plus flour, coffee, and sugar to see her through the worst of the season. He folded the bills, sealed the envelope, and wrote Mylin Chen across the front in his bold script. He caught his reflection in the window glass. 55 years old. Silver threading his temples, lines deepening around his eyes. He was a successful man, a generous man, the kind of man who took care of his community. He pulled on his heavy buffalo hide coat and headed for the stables. The ride into town took 40 minutes. His horse, a sturdy roan, crunched through the snow-crusted ground, its breath pluming like steam from a locomotive. Fence lines stretched endlessly on either side, marking the boundaries of the empire Arthur had built over 30 years. 10,000 acres, 300 head of cattle. Providence had been kind to him. His duty was to share that providence. As he crested the ridge overlooking the town, he spotted the thin, dark column of smoke rising from a cabin on the eastern edge. It was Mylin's place, small, weathered, and leaning slightly against the wind. It looked tired. Arthur touched the envelope in his coat pocket and urged his horse forward. The wealthy man's burden, his father used to say, is knowing when to give. Arthur had always prided himself on that wisdom. He gave strategically, generously, appropriately. This would be no different. Inside the cabin, Mylin Chen knelt by her hearth, coaxing reluctant flames from damp wood. Smoke curled back into the room, stinging her eyes. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked from scrubbing other people's laundry in water cold enough to ache deep in the bone. She sat back on her heels and studied the meager stack of wood beside the fireplace. 3 days left. Maybe 4, if she burned it slowly and slept in her coat. The knock at the door startled her. She stood, smoothing her dress. It was a light pink prairie dress, a garment of delicate cotton that was woefully unsuited for a Wyoming winter. It was the finest thing she owned, a relic of a happier time, and she wore it like armor against the drab reality of her poverty. She opened the door. Arthur Thorne sat astride his horse, looking down at her. His expression was a familiar blend of concern and pity, the look of a man completely certain of his welcome. "Mrs. Chen," he said, touching his hat. "Cold morning." "It is, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "May I help you? May I come in for a moment?" She stepped aside. He dismounted, tied his horse to the rail, and entered the small cabin. He took it in at a glance, the thin curtains, the cracked cup on the table, the empty shelves. But he also saw the swept floor, the carefully patched quilt, and the small shrine to her husband in the corner. Poor, but impeccably clean. "I'll speak plainly," Arthur said, removing his gloves. "Winter is hard on folks, especially those alone. I know you're managing, but I'd rest easier knowing you had what you needed." He pulled the envelope from his coat and set it on her table. $50. For wooden supplies. Consider it a community responsibility. Neighbors helping neighbors through hard times. Mylin looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. She looked down at her light pink dress, then back at him. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Thorne." "It's what a man does when he has been blessed with plenty," he said, smiling, pleased with himself. "No need to thank me. Just stay warm, Mrs. Chen." He left before she could respond. Through her window, she watched him mount his horse and ride away, a dark silhouette against the blinding white snow. Satisfied with his good deed, Arthur rode home. Mylin stood alone in her cabin. The fire crackled behind her, struggling against the damp wood. She walked slowly to the table and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. She broke the seal and counted the bills. $50. 3 months' worth of laundry work. Her jaw tightened. She folded the money carefully, tucked it back in the envelope, and set it beside her sewing basket. Outside, the wind rattled her windows. Inside, something harder than pride settled in her chest. "I did not ask for this," she whispered to the empty room. She knew what the money meant. Charity. Pity. The rich man solving a problem he noticed while riding past. She was the problem. Her poverty was the discomfort he had just paid to stop seeing. She looked at her hands, red, calloused, honest hands. They had earned every penny she had. They didn't beg. Tomorrow, she would return his money. Tonight, she would burn the fence posts and be grateful for the warmth. Arthur found the envelope on his desk when he came down for breakfast the next morning. His name was written across the front in careful, elegant script. He recognized it immediately. He tore it open. Every dollar he'd given her was there, counted and folded with precision. Confusion came first, then irritation. Didn't she understand he was helping? This wasn't a loan expecting repayment. This was kindness, community obligation. "Mrs. Gable," he called. His housekeeper appeared from the kitchen with a pot of coffee. "So, this envelope. When did it arrive?" "Early this morning, sir. Before dawn." Mrs. Chen walked it over herself. Walked. Arthur looked toward the window. "That's 5 miles in the snow." "Yes, sir." I offered her coffee and a ride back, but she declined. She said she had washing to do. Arthur set the envelope down heavily. 5 miles before dawn to return money that could have saved her considerable suffering. What kind of pride drove a woman to such lengths? The sound of voices drew him to the sitting room later that morning. Hiram Pogue, the town banker, sat warming himself by the fire with a glass of Arthur's brandy. "Merry Christmas, Arthur," Hiram said, raising his glass. Hiram didn't expect company this morning. Was passing by. Thought I'd wish you season's greetings. Hiram's eyes glinted with amusement. Heard an interesting story at the bank yesterday. About the widow Chen refusing your help. Arthur stiffened. News travels fast. In a town this size, lightning's got nothing on gossip, Hiram chuckled. Some folks would rather freeze than accept charity. I suppose stubborn pride will be her downfall. It's a cultural thing, perhaps. Arthur poured himself coffee, his back to Hiram. Maybe she doesn't see it as help. What else would it be? Interference? Pity? Being made into someone's project. Hiram snorted. You're too philosophical, Arthur. The woman needs money. You've got money. Simple mathematics. If she's too proud to accept it, that's her cross to bear. After Hiram left, Arthur sat in his study, staring at the returned envelope. The house felt too big, too quiet. Christmas decorations hung in every room, holly on the mantel, candles in the windows. All of it suddenly seemed hollow. He thought of Mai Lin walking 5 miles in the dark, in the snow, to return his charity. That took more strength than accepting it would have. You can lead a horse to water, Arthur thought, but some may die of thirst before they'll drink from another man's bucket. Maybe the solution wasn't different water. Maybe it was a different bucket. She needed the money. That was certain. She simply needed to earn it honestly so she could keep her dignity. He would hire her for something. Make it real work. That way, she'd have her pride and he'd have his clear conscience. By noon, he'd formed his plan. By afternoon, he was riding back toward town. Arthur found Mai Lin at the general store, counting coins from her worn purse. She was buying rice and beans. Nothing else. The coins barely covered the cost. She wore the same light pink prairie dress beneath her threadbare coat, a splash of color against the gray timber of the store. Mrs. Chen, he said, approaching. Might I have a word? She turned, weariness crossing her face. Mr. Thorne. I have a business proposition. I need new curtains for my guest rooms. Something fresher for the new year. I know you do fine needlework. Would you be willing to take the commission? Mai Lin studied him. Her dark eyes were sharp, intelligent. What is wrong with your current curtains? Nothing wrong, exactly. Just time for something different. A fresh start. You understand. I see. She hesitated. What color were you thinking? Whatever you think best. You have good taste, I'm sure. I will need to see the windows. To take measurements. Of course. Come by this afternoon. She nodded slowly. I will finish my shopping and head over. 2 hours later, Mai Lin stood in Arthur's guest room, measuring tape in hand, staring at curtains that were clearly new. The fabric was crisp, the stitching perfect, the color unfaded. Nothing about them suggested they needed replacing. She turned to Arthur, who stood in the doorway. Your guest room curtains are mighty fine already, Mr. Thorne, she said. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight. Well, I wanted something different. For the new year. I see. She lowered the measuring tape. I will have them finished by December 28th, $20 for both windows. That is fair pricing for the work and materials. 20 is fine. Generous, even. She left without another word. Arthur watched her go, satisfaction warming his chest. There. A solution that honored both their positions. She'd have money, he'd have new curtains. Everyone's dignity intact. 2 days later, Mai Lin returned. She carried a package wrapped in brown paper. Arthur opened it to find beautiful curtains, a deep indigo with subtle embroidery along the hems, far finer than what he had before. These are excellent work, Mrs. Chen. Thank you. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. Here is your change. Arthur stared at the $15 she held out. The price was $20. For your labor. The curtains cost $5 in materials. My labor is not worth $15 for 2 days of sewing. $5 is honest payment. The rest is charity dressed up as work. She set the money on his desk. You have a kind heart, Mr. Thorne. But I can smell pity, no matter how you package it. She left him standing in his study, $15 in his hand, feeling more foolish than he had in years. Charity dressed up as work still smells like pity to the one doing the sewing. The words stung because they were true. Heard you can't give your money away, Thorne. Hiram Pogue's voice carried across the church steps where men gathered after the Sunday service. Several chuckled. Arthur felt heat rise in his collar. Don't know what you mean, Hiram. My Lin Chen returned your Christmas gift, refused your work offer, handed back your change. Town's talking about it. Some say she's an admirable woman standing on her own. Others say she's a fool for refusing help from a man who can afford it. Arthur descended the steps, trying to move past the conversation. Hiram followed. Me? I think maybe she's holding out for something more permanent. Hiram grinned. A ring instead of dollar bills, if you catch my meaning. That's enough, Hiram. Just saying what folks are whispering. Rich rancher, pretty widow, money exchanging hands. People notice these things. Arthur turned, anger flashing in his eyes. The woman just wants to stand on her own. Nothing more complicated than that. He walked away before he said something he'd regret, but the damage was done. By afternoon, the gossip had spread through town like creek water after a snowmelt. He heard fragments everywhere, at the post office, outside the saloon. Turned him down twice now. Too proud for her own good. Makes you wonder what she's really waiting for. By evening, Arthur sat in his study, furious not at My Lin, but at the town's cruel speculation. Every attempt to help her had only made things worse. Now she was trapped in gossip she didn't deserve, and he was the fool who'd put her there. The road to hell was indeed paved with good intentions. Through his window, he could see the first stars appearing. Christmas was 2 days past. The season of goodwill had turned bitter. Arthur poured himself whiskey and didn't drink it. He just sat staring at the amber liquid, wondering how charity had become such a complicated thing. His eyes drifted to the portrait above the fireplace. His wife, Eleanor, painted the year before she died. She had hated that portrait, she said it made her look too serious. But Arthur loved it because it captured the clarity in her eyes, the directness of her gaze. What would you say about this mess? He asked the painting. Her voice came to him, a memory soft but clear. Giving what costs you nothing means nothing, Arthur. She'd said that once, years ago, when he'd donated money to build a new church. He'd written the check proudly, publicly. Eleanor had watched him accept the town's gratitude. And later, in their bedroom, she had spoken those words. You gave what you'd never miss. From your excess, not your life. It was easy money, easy kindness. The best gifts come from hands that have to get dirty giving them. He had been angry then, defensive. But she had been right. Arthur looked at his hands in the firelight. Soft hands. Hands that signed checks and held reins. Hands that had never split firewood or mended fences or done work that left blisters and blood in decades. All his charity had been easy. Money he'd never miss, going to problems he never had to face. He had bought his way out of discomfort, paid to keep suffering at arm's length. My Lin hadn't refused his help. She had refused to be made small by it. The realization hit him like the winter wind, sharp, cold, clarifying. She didn't need his money. She needed his respect. She needed his presence. She needed his willingness to see her as an equal rather than a problem requiring his wealth to solve. Arthur stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Somewhere out there, My Lin Chen was probably awake, burning fence posts and wondering when the wealthy rancher would finally leave her alone. Tomorrow was December 28th, Christmas had passed. But perhaps its real meaning hadn't. Perhaps it was waiting for him to understand what giving actually required. He looked at his soft hands again. Tomorrow, they would learn what Eleanor had meant about getting dirty. Mylin woke to hammering. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped onto her porch, her breath clouding in the frozen dawn. Arthur Thorne stood at her fence line, a heavy mallet in his hand, replacing a broken post. She stood watching, saying nothing. He worked steadily, pulling out rotted wood and setting new posts. His movements were clumsy, clearly not a man accustomed to manual labor anymore, but he worked carefully, deliberately, checking each post for straightness before packing dirt and snow around its base. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed higher. Mylin went inside, stoked her fire, and made coffee. She watched through her window as Arthur worked his way down the fence line. He wasn't wearing his fine gloves. She could see blood on the mallet handle from where she stood. By noon, he'd completed one full side of her property. He stopped, examined his work, and moved to the next section. Mylin put on her coat and walked out to him. "Mr. Thorne." He looked up, his face red from cold and exertion. Sweat matted his silver hair. "Mrs. Chen. You didn't need to come out." "I know I didn't need to." She looked at the fence. "That is why I am here." She studied him. His coat was dirty. His hands were wrapped in a handkerchief where blisters had formed and broken. He looked exhausted and strangely alive, more present than she'd ever seen him. "Why?" she asked. "Because everything I tried to give you before was easy," he said, leaning on the mallet. "Money I'd never miss. Work that cost me nothing. I was trying to buy my way out of caring." He looked at his battered hands. "Figured maybe I should try giving something that actually costs me something. Your hands are bleeding. They'll heal. The fence. It does not need to be perfect. I know. But I need to finish it anyway." Mylin watched him work for another moment, then went back inside. But she didn't close the door. She left it open, and he could see her moving in the warm interior, her pink dress a soft promise of life against the harsh winter. By sunset, the fence was mended. Poorly, honestly, completely. Arthur stood back, surveying his work. It wasn't beautiful. Several posts leaned slightly, and the wire wasn't perfectly taut. But it was solid. It would hold. He gathered his tools and walked to his horse. Mylin stood on her porch, the envelope with his returned money still visible in her apron pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and mounted. His hand shook on the reins. Every muscle ached. He'd be sore for days. But riding away, he felt lighter than he had in years. A man's measure ain't in his wallet. It's in what he's willing to blister his hands for. Behind him, Mylin stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she pulled out the envelope, looked at it, looked at the mended fence. Something shifted in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, but something warmer. Something like the beginning of respect. Mylin found him on her porch at dawn the next day. Not knocking, not making demands. Just sitting on the cold step, his hat in his bandaged hands, watching the sunrise color the snow gold and pink. "Mr. Thorne." He looked up. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. Sorry for the intrusion. I just needed somewhere quiet to think." She opened her door wider. "Coffee is on." He followed her inside. The cabin was warm. He could see she was burning proper firewood now. She must have used some of the money he refused to take back, or perhaps she had traded for it. They sat at her small table, and she poured coffee into 2 mismatched cups. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Arthur said, "I've been thinking about why you kept returning my money. Have you figured it out?" "I think so." It wasn't about the money at all. Mylin wrapped her hands around her cup. "No. It was not. It was about what the money meant," Arthur said. "It made you a problem. Something broken that needed fixing. A task on my Christmas list, Checked off so I could feel generous. My Lin nodded slowly. That is exactly what it was. I know I meant well. But meaning well isn't the same as doing good. No, she said. It is not. Arthur met her gaze. His face looked tired, but his eyes were clearer than before. Less certain, more honest. All my charity has been easy, Mrs. Chen. From excess, not from life. I bought goodwill without earning it. Solved problems without facing them. The fence. That was me trying to see you. Actually see you. Not just your poverty. Not just a problem I could pay to stop noticing. The coffee steamed between them. Outside, the world was waking. I am sorry, Arthur said. For making you into something you are not. For thinking money could replace presence. For every time I made you feel small. My Lin's throat tightened. I am not refusing help because I do not need it. I do need it desperately. I know. But you need to be seen while you are helped. Respected while you are struggling. Treated like a person, not a project. I understand that now. She reached into her apron and pulled out the envelope one final time. She set it on the table between them. I do not want your money, Mr. Thorne. He nodded, not arguing. But, she continued, I would not mind your company. If you are willing to come as a man, not a benefactor. As someone who sits at this table like an equal, not a rescuer. Arthur's hand shook as he reached across the table. Not for the money, but for her hand. His bandaged palm settled over her work-roughened fingers. I'd like that, he said. Very much. The sunrise does not care if you are rich or poor, she said softly. It warms every face that turns to meet it. They sat that way for a long time. Two broken people learning that the best gifts can't be bought or refused, only offered from one honest heart to another. The town saw them arrive together for the New Year's Eve gathering. Not grand, not announced. Just Arthur Thorne and my Lin Chen walking side by side down the main street. Two people among equals. The gossip, which had burned so hot a week before, suddenly found no fuel. What they saw wasn't scandal or scheming. Just a man and a woman, both worn by life, both walking together through the cold toward the warmth of community. Inside the town hall, tables groaned with food brought by every family. Children ran between chairs while adults talked and laughed. Arthur and my Lin found seats at a table with the Pogues, the Gables, and old Sam from the ranch. Hiram Pogue opened his mouth, probably to make some pointed comment, but his wife elbowed him sharply. He closed his mouth and passed the biscuits instead. After the meal, the Reverend stood to offer the year-end blessing. As we close this year and open the next, he said, we are reminded that the best gifts aren't found in our wallets, but in our willingness to show up for one another. To work beside each other. To sit at tables together as equals. His eyes found Arthur and my Lin. He smiled. Sometimes we have to learn that charity isn't money given from comfort. It is life shared through discomfort. It is the gift that costs us who we thought we were, so we can become who we are meant to be. Later, as people prepared to leave, Arthur found himself standing beside my Lin at the coat hooks. He helped her with her shawl, and she smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Folks will talk, she murmured. Let them talk, Arthur replied. This time, they'll have something true to say. That I finally learned what Christmas means. They walked together into the cold night. Snow had begun falling, soft and steady. The streets were empty except for them, their footsteps crunching in rhythm. At my Lin's gate, the one he'd mended, they stopped. Thank you for today, she said. Thank you for teaching me the difference between charity and compassion. She touched the fence post. It is holding well. Even leans a bit less than before. Arthur laughed. I should probably come by next week. Check the far corner. I think I saw some loose wire. I would appreciate that. Her eye sparkled. Though I should warn you, I might put you to work on other things. The porch step is a little wobbly. I'll bring my mallet. Arthur pulled off his gloves, the new ones Mrs. Gable had bought him to replace the bloodstained pair. He held them out to My Lin. For your hands, he said. Since mine finally learned what they are for. My Lin took them, her fingers brushing his. The gloves were too large, but she put them on anyway. They are perfect, she said. The best things in life can't be bought, Arthur said, echoing the lesson she had taught him. They are built. Hand to hand. Heart to heart. One honest day at a time. Arthur watched her walk to her door. Light spilled out when she opened it, warm, golden, welcoming. She turned in the doorway, the light pink of her dress catching the glow, and waved. He waved back. Then she went inside. Arthur was alone in the falling snow. But he wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, maybe since Eleanor died, he felt connected to something real. Something that mattered. He looked at his hands. They were healing, but the scars would remain. Good, he thought. Let them remind him. Tomorrow he'd ride back. They'd share coffee. Maybe he'd fix that porch step. Maybe they'd just talk. The point wasn't what they did. It was that they did it together. As Arthur rode toward home, he passed the church. Candles still burned in the windows, light against darkness. He thought about Christmas, how he'd thought it had passed. But maybe Christmas wasn't a single day. Maybe it was every moment someone chose presence over comfort, connection over control, love over pride. Maybe Christmas was learning that the best gift you could give was yourself, flawed, uncertain, but honestly trying. In her cabin, My Lin set his gloves on the table beside her late husband's picture. The fire crackled warm. Outside her mended fence, the world was soft with snow. She thought about next week, about coffee and conversation, and maybe letting someone see her not as a problem to solve, but as a person worth knowing. That was the gift. Not money or work or charity. But being seen. Being known. Being worth someone's blistered hands and bleeding palms. Christmas came late that year to the high country. But when it arrived, quiet, honest, built by imperfect hands, it came true.